Believe it or not, 20 minutes ago I planned to be up here at the right time, and I forgot. Our gospel reading for today is Mark 6, 1 through 6, pages 1199 through 1200. Jesus left and returned to his hometown with his disciples. The next Sabbath he taught in the Jewish meeting place. Many of the people who heard him were amazed and asked, "How can he do all this? Where did he get such wisdom and the power to work these miracles? Isn't he the carpenter, the son of Mary? Aren't James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon his brothers? Don't his sisters still live here in town?" The people were very unhappy because of what he was doing. But Jesus said, "Prophets are honored by everyone except the people of their hometown and their relatives and their own family." Jesus could not work any miracles there, except to heal a few sick people by placing his hands on them. He was surprised that the people did not have any faith. Jesus taught in all the neighboring villages.
Do I have to? You know, if you critically read this story, you think, oh, wait a minute. Nazareth is a very small town, much smaller than Sierra Madre. Everybody knew everybody. You mean all of that time? Did you say something?
Like Palm Springs.
Like a lot of small towns, all right? You would wonder, what did they know about him? I mean, the three wise men, we are told, followed the star and knew that he was something really, 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 really special. We've heard the story of the shepherds in the fields in Bethlehem coming to see the Christ child. The book, or I should say the Gospel of Mark, was written at an earlier age. Did they leave something out? And they referred to him as the carpenter's son. What is this all about? You know, so often people in Christian churches argue with each other about Scripture. And almost everybody has their favorite gospel. Whatever gospel you choose, that's the one you look at, and you kind of ignore the others. And then people get into these arguments saying that, well, it says right here, and then this is all what their faith is about. Their faith becomes something about, I have to believe this, 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 and this, and therefore that makes me a Christian. And I think that is so unfortunate that we draw a circle and leave people out if they don't think exactly the way we interpret things. And I see this happening all the time. And in the case of Jesus in his hometown, hey folks, didn't you know that he was a little special? It even says that he did some healings. I mean, that's special. All the Gospels agree with that. We know he was a miracle worker. All the Gospels agree with that. He kind of taught a radical love that most people were not practicing in those days. All the Gospels agree about that. So what is the argument about? And why are Christians, unfortunately, often very narrow-minded when it comes to Scripture? I want to tell you a story about a person I met when I was back in St. Louis, Missouri. And it was a love story and a pathetic story all at the same time. I will call him Mike. He was a person I met at Epiphany Church. And this was the church I often attended when I was back in St. Louis when I was working on my doctorate. And Mike was a very prominent engineer working for Boeing at Aircraft, which is a very large company there back in St. Louis. And he was very well known, very well respected. He and his sister, both in their early 40s, were living with mom and dad, who are now getting older, and they were very devoted. And the younger brother, there were 3 children altogether, was married and had a family, so of course mom and dad were thrilled that they had their grandchildren. But Mike and his sister never married. And there was a reason for that. Just before I got to St. Louis the first time, there was a raid in a gay bar. Mike was in that bar. And fortunately, he had a very, very common name, both first and last, where a person would not necessarily put the two together, because Mike really, really covered it up that he was gay, particularly being an engineer in Missouri. And so you're allowed to call one phone number. It's the same there as here. And he called home. And his father answered the phone, and he asked to be bailed out. The father was absolutely furious. How could you do this to me? Oh, you're going to go to hell for this one. Oh, he went on and on and on. And so Mike, of course, lied to his father. He says, well, I was just curious, and somebody invited me, and I just happened to be there. This is not really who I am. And please, will you get me out of here? This is terrible. Oh, the father. Oh. And then of course, when he told his mother, oh, gee. Now, these people were members of a very, very conservative church. No matter what you do, you're going to go to hell. Okay? They taught him, when he was in his church, Jesus never drank wine. It was grape juice. Obviously, they don't read Greek. They taught him that women are to be silent in church, therefore no female ministers. They taught him that if you were gay or you were lesbian, you were definitely going to go to hell. Because isn't that what Jesus said? I don't think so. And so that it was just, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. And it was judgment, 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 judgment. And so here's Mike in a really precarious situation. The reason why Mike and his sister never married, there were 3 kids, two out of the 3 were gay, okay? But mom and dad didn't know this. And so they just really, really kept it very, very quiet. And so after the father heard that he had been there, of course he had to tell the church elders. And they threw him out of the church. Now here was a fellow of really deep faith, and he had no church. And so he kind of asked around, not at Boeing, of course, but around town. And would there be a place where he could dare even go through the door? And they told him about Epiphany Church, which was not that much different than many other churches in the United Church of Christ. And so he went there, and the first shock, there was a female pastor. Oh, they allow it, and the building has to come down to the ground, you know, and it was a church, it was mixed. They were black, they were white, they were gay, they were straight, they were just kind of everything. It was just a very mixed group there, because it was in a neighborhood that had been German to start out with, and then had changed as the city had changed. And he sort of kind of went through the door, and people greeted him very nicely. And there were 2 people there that had been at the bar that same night that he had been, so they recognized him and welcomed him. Oh my gosh, somebody would welcome him? I mean, what is this? And so after church, he asked the pastor if he could have a talk with her, because he was very, very confused. He had been taught all his life about what it meant to be a Christian. And what she gathered from this conversation is that his understanding of Christianity was believing certain things, but there wasn't much about action. There was a lot of judgment, watching people, making sure they didn't do anything wrong by their standards. And so she asked him, you know, about his situation. He told her that he had been arrested at this bar. There was a raid on this bar. And she said, do you think God made you this way? Or do you think you chose to be this way? He goes, oh, believe me, I did not choose this. No way did I choose this. I've been hiding this all my life. I even knew when I was like 8 years old that I was different than the other kids, and I've been hiding it. Oh, heavens, no. I would never, ever, ever choose this. Well, the thing she said, do you think God made a mistake? And he was thinking, well, no. God made everything, and we're told in Genesis 1, it was good. And she says, are you good? And he started thinking, well, I was taught that I'm not good. I said, but what is it? She said, what does it say in Genesis? That God made humans, made male and female. They were good. And the rest of creation was good. So, what does that say? He gave it a lot of thought and started learning a whole different way of viewing his faith tradition. Mike learned from this church there in St. Louis that your faith tradition, especially the Christian tradition, really talks about Jesus and what he modeled. He modeled acceptance and love and forgiveness and generosity and openness, and especially embracing those that weren't embraced by anybody else. Can you imagine in the first century being a leper or having some other kind of horrible disease where you were so contaminated and nobody would want to have anything to do with you? And where Jesus would say, come on, come to my table. Let's have a chat. I care about you. And his modeling of servanthood. I mean, here he's the teacher, right? He's the leader. What is he doing down in a low position, washing somebody's feet? Can you imagine? What would he be doing? I mean, he's the teacher. Teachers don't act as servants. They're the ones in charge. You have your disciples are to be the servants, not you. He totally reversed everything, so that all people could be honored. I'm pleased to say that Mike has his job. They didn't figure it. The names were published in the paper, but as I said, his name was so common that it could be anybody. And no one suspected, because he really, really covered it up. And he would sometimes go and date women so that no one would think anything of it. And to this day, he has a very, very prominent position at Boeing Aircraft in St. Louis. But what he learned, unfortunately, is what the people in Jesus' hometown didn't learn. They really didn't learn who he was, what he stood for, the blessings that he really had for everybody, the joy that people could have from sharing and giving and loving and forgiving. All those things they missed out on, didn't they? Because they didn't know him. But let us here on this day and every day that we gather together, remember Jesus. Remember what he had to tell us, his life example, so that we can follow him, not because of what we believe about him so much, but because of his example of how we can live our lives and how we can be a blessing to each other and truly honor the Creator who made us all. Amen. It's communion today.